All right, Tribe. This is our very first Q&A sort of webinar style format. I'm here with master presenter Kim Peachy. So g'day, Kim. How you going?
Hi guys, I'm good.
And obviously, a lot of you are becoming more and more familiar with Kim, especially those who are based in Melbourne. Kim's one of the main educators with Sam, along with Sam over there. But also, Kim is contributing wonderfully to the content in our FFC, Functional Fitness Concepts, as well as the Tribe. So things like Wednesday Wisdom posts that we put up, videos of the week, and also the live content as well. So you're doing a great job on that, and you're definitely connecting with the audience and the coaches out there, really gravitating to certainly ideas of mobility, ideas of what assessment really means. Are we over the top when we assess? Should we do, all of these things really matter. So hence the title, right, of this webinar is, are you assessing or are you guessing? So it's a question mark, almost a double question mark. And that really is born out of the famous Paul Check quote, if you're not assessing, then you're guessing. So I think cleverly Kim thought we'd raise a question in and around that, are you assessing or you're guessing? So what's your rationale behind that, Kim? And do you want to talk a little bit more about that kind of concept or that question that's from that particular concept?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess as a coach, I think your assessments, obviously you're ongoing assessing every single time you are coaching a client, right? You're watching their every rep. Well, you should be. You're watching all of their reps, you're watching their form. But I think assessments, if you're an FTI educated coach, then you're most likely doing a movement assessment at the start or a movement screening with any new clients that come in, just to have a look at their posture, how their joints move, all that kind of stuff as you get them started. But I kind of pose this question because I think as coaches, we always focus on obviously getting more strength gains, getting more fitness gains, which is understandable because that's what your clients generally come to you for. But I think an area that a lot of coaches fall down is they never actually go back and assess or check in on that mobility and on those movement screening results. And they're going to change. Like, everybody's body is very fluid. Their mobility is fluid. It's going to change as their lifestyle factors change, right? So, and I think we assess a client on their movement and their actual body's abilities to move when they first walk in the door. But then 6 months down the track, we haven't actually checked in or looked in at that again at all. We're so focused on their strength and on their fitness that we're not actually focusing on their mobility and how well they are able to perform those movements. So that's kind of what prompted me to raise this as a topic, because I think it's an area that a lot of coaches would benefit from focusing a little more on.
Yeah, wonderful. And the way I see that is, you put it, is there's this initial idea of an initial assessment. And let's say we've adapted that from the talk do of the rehab trainer methodology. Now, if we hold that thought for a moment, the initial assessment based on, it could be on a number of different FMS. There are plenty of good assessment tools out there or methodologies. So what we are saying in the FTI methodology is that that's really important, is to have a system that is easily plugged and played for your client, right? And that's here's the thing here, Kim, we can maybe expand on. It's for the client, but what about for the group? What about if we've got semi-private and we've got group training? How does the assessment take place as the initial assessment versus the ongoing? And that's the big key here is, Kim, talk a little bit more about that. So we've got this initial assessment, which is based on, let's say at the moment from an FTI perspective, on the rehab trainer talk, see, do. So in effect, you talk, you raise a series of key questions. Now, this is twofold, and we can get into this in a bit more detail. You've got the qualitative and you've got the quantifiable. The quantifiable is all of the analysis, right? By the qualitative, and you talk about this, is their lifestyle factors, hobbies, etc., which really kind of are important to know, because if they're doing certain hobbies that kind of aggravate the back, for example, or they're not aware of, then these are problems. What about their work life? Are they a labourer? Do they sit down too much? Are they active or inactive? So that's the talk element. The C is the observations, right? And that's where it's really important to look at it, right, from the lens of that X-ray vision. All right, so we're observing, and I think sometimes, Kim, oftentimes with the observing, maybe coaches just want to look for faults, right? So here's the important part is, what are we really seeing when we're observing? That's the another question that we can unfold or unwrap. The other part of it is the do. So actually getting them to perform a series of screens or a series of those screen trains, we call them, right? Are they competent or are they not? Are they asymmetrical differences? So that being said, I wanted to kind of just put that as an umbrella thing that we really need to be mindful of from an FTI perspective for our coaches. But if we go back to the idea of the initial versus the ongoing, can you talk a little bit more about the importance of that?
Yeah, so obviously an initial is really important because if someone's come in the door and you have no idea how they move, you have no idea what their lifestyle is like, what experience they have as you know, trainers or exercisers or clients, whatever. So you really need that initial assessment to get an understanding of where their body is at, because otherwise it's legitimately like the phrase, you're just guessing, you know, what you're programming, like what do they need? What does their body need? You really need that initial assessment and the movement screening to see that and get a good gauge. And I think even people who are just coming into a group class program, even if they're not doing anything that you need to specifically program for, I mean, it depends on your format. Like some classes are huge, you know, there's 40 people in a session, and it can get quite challenging to do that, right? But it depends how you've got it set up. For us, for my gym, we have 12 people in a class at any one time. So, and we keep it that small on purpose because of our focus on movement quality. But they still do an initial screening with me when they come in, just for things like if they can't complete like an airport controller and get their fingertips back to the wall at least, they can't do any overhead pressing movements with us yet. If they can't do a waiter's bow, they can't do any form of weighted hinges yet. So for us, we're very strict on that, but it's not, I guess, always possible in some of the huge group settings. But I guess you just have to be super tuned into how they're moving when they're actually participating in the session, and modify on the fly, I suppose. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, that modification sort of on the fly though, it's still based on the X-ray vision or that observation of that coach. And the more that you can see the sort of micro dysfunctions, the easier it is to potentially like pull someone aside from like catastrophe, right? And here's the thing, right, is that there's some schools of thought that say just let people move, right? Let them move. But it's not really the case, right? If you just say, if we adopt that philosophy and just disregard assessing at any level, like dangers can come about from there, Kim, for example, right? If we're just complacent and casual and like, well, they'll just figure it out, right? It's this self-organization that we think, you know, is easily adapted to for clients.
Yeah. I guess for me, I just think it's really important. And do you know what? You could still adapt. I just, while you were saying that, I had a thought. You can still adapt even if you did have a really huge group class setting and you couldn't actually, you struggled to get that kind of assessment, one-on-one assessment in. You could still have some kind of screening form that just got an idea on their lifestyle. Like, you know, what's your work like? Are you at a desk or are you in labor? You know, are you constantly leaning forward? Just kind of get an idea of their body. Not everyone's obviously different, but by getting someone who says, I sit at a desk at a lot all day and I cycle to and from work every day, you could probably get a pretty good understanding of like, well, their hips probably fall into a posterior pelvic tilt a lot because they spent a lot of time like hunched on their bike, and then they spend a lot of time at a desk like this. So you could get an idea of what kind of issues they may have before you've even met them based off that. And then obviously that will give you a bit more of an in-depth understanding of how they're going to move before they've even walked in the door in a group class setting. If that makes sense, I guess. But yeah, I think people don't place enough emphasis on the movement screening side of things. It's all about, you know, like how fit are you now versus how fit you are then. And that's great. Obviously that's what people come in the door for. But if their movement quality is not great and they've got a lot of mobility restrictions, their body is going to break down throughout that process and they're not going to get to that fitness goal. So I guess I look at it as like, if you don't have the mobility and the movement, like the postural correction, all that kind of stuff going on in line with your training, then you're going to lose a lot of clients, or you're going to struggle to get them there. Because if they don't have that foundation, they're not going to be able to make it to that end point.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. And one question I have is like, how do we make assessment like not just a compliance thing? How do we make it engaging? How do we make it attractive enough? I think is key too, Kim, would be another facet of this where clients are not thinking, oh shit, I need to do a test here, or they're not going to feel like a failure. So what do you say? How do we move away from perceived failure from the client's perspective and fear of doing assessments to making it a part of their programming, right? Like in the language that us as coaches convey.
Yep. So as in an ongoing assessment process, you mean?
Or even initial or ongoing, yeah. How do we make it so that we're not too invasive, yeah? Like an ongoing, we're paralyzing them, right? Analysis, right? Paralysis through analysis. What's the way that coaches aren't tripped up on that? Because it's so easy to do. I've done that many years ago as well, mind you. It's an easy trap.
Yeah. I think it's all about language. So like the Wednesday Wisdom post I just did on communication, I think is communication on how you talk to your clients about all of this is key. So within an initial setting, I'm always very aware, I don't call it an assessment, I call it a screening, because the word assessment, if someone hasn't exercised for a while or something like that, they're very much like, that initial fear kicks in, right? Oh my God, you're testing me. So we'll say a screening, and I'll generally, go through and say it's nothing high intensity. It's nothing strenuous. We're just having a look at the range of motion in your joints, any niggling pains that you have, so that we can create a program that's best targeted for your body. And I think rather than that then sounding intimidating or nerve-wracking, it sounds like, oh wow, like I'm going to get a customized thing that like this person really wants to help me. And I think that just the way that you word things can have a massive impact. In terms of the ongoing assessments, for us, like we call it R week at my gym. So it's called record, reflect, and recover. So the 3 R's. So every 10 weeks, our clients will go through this week in between their programming. So they'll do a mobility check-in, like assessment. They'll do a fitness or strength check-in assessment, and then they'll recover for the rest of the week. So I think it all just becomes part of that week. It's not the only thing that they're focusing on. Does that kind of make sense? So rather than it being like, this is a test, it's like, no, this is a recovery week. We're checking in on your progress, and then we know how to progress you forward from there.
Yeah, I love it. It's more integrative, and I think you've hit the mark there on almost a wellness, integrative wellness, fitness kind of assessment. And I think that's the bridge, I believe, that we're all crossing, is this idea of wellness and fitness coming together. So it is that qualitative aspect of life, quality of life, and not just the quantity. How many reps can you do? And, how much range of motion, should I have versus you? And all of this sort of like, it's garbage, right? In the end, because everyone, as you say, it's personalized. So how do we personalize it? How do we make it attractive enough that like you can green brainstorm it, right? Like you've done there, and have a triple R week, and I think that's easily done based on how we communicate with our clients, and having that language factored in such a way that's why the talk part is so important. And if some of you jumped onto our movement restoration coach program, which Kim's also an educator of, we go into deep analysis on that, right? For good reason. But there's the art of coaching that also needs to be laid in this, so that you have engagement, you have enjoyment and appreciation that this is part and parcel of their movement journey. So I love it, Kim. I love the quality aspect. I believe, and from what you're saying, needs to be brought in under this wellness fitness umbrella. So I think once we get that, the art of coaching and the technical side of coaching, call it, then I think it's a beautiful synergy. And that allows us to go, well, assessing is just part of what we do. It's a necessity. it's not something I think oftentimes team coaches can feel really uncomfortable because A, they don't have the knowledge or skill set around it. B, they feel that the clients, maybe it's a perception, really don't want it. So what we need to do, I believe, is move away from those perceptions, bridge that gap of lack of understanding. Of course, having the technical knowledge and going, yes, I know how to assess, I know how to observe, I know how to apply, but at the same time, as you put it, how do we actually communicate that with clients on an initial and ongoing basis? And so from your perspective, doing both group and one-on-one training, how do you get around that? Because on one-on-one, you can become, it's more personalized, of course, and you can spend more time naturally with them. How do you sort of work around that when it comes to groups?
Well, pretty much all training I do is in a semi-private setting or a group setting. I don't really take one-on-ones very much at all anymore, to be honest. So as I said, the way that we do it with semi-private, we have an R week as such. So we have like a Google, we use everything we do is on Google Docs and Google spreadsheets. So we've got tablets with programs and stuff for each person when they come in that sense. So they have a spreadsheet or like an R week spreadsheet that goes through, that they record all their results in as they go. But for us, it's like we work through it with them as they do it. And it's more of, let's say their ankle mobility decreased across the 10-week block since they did the last assessment. It's all about that communication. It's not about like, oh, well, your ankle mobility is worse, like we've got to fix that, because that instantly sets off so many alarm bells of like, something's wrong with you, you're going backwards, we need to fix you because you're not okay. It'd be more about like, okay, well, that's all right. What's changed in the last 10 weeks? Are you wearing different footwear? Are you cycling more? Are you doing more hikes? Are you wearing heels to work again because you're back in the office? Like so many little things so that it becomes like a check-in touch point, not a failure or it's the numbers don't really matter as such in the sense of like what number you get. It's more about like, how has your body changed and what work do we need to do around that if we're not progressing forward in the way that we were hoping to.
Yeah, big time. It's all coming together now. And I think that the outcomes of this question in and around are you assessing or are you guessing is beyond. I reckon it transcends our notion of what assessing is. And it's not just a technical undertaking where, as you put it, clients have this perceived fear of assessing, being assessed, being judged, right? Being assessed may also be feeling judged. So that's why that level of emotional intelligence factored in to how we convey language is so important, to the point where it becomes an ongoing factor, right? Whether you need to alter the programming or alter the session because someone decided that they wanted to do a 10K run with their friends, right, before your session, they come in. If you're not reading them well or not asking those questions, and then you're starting to load them up with heavy deadlifts and what have you, and you're gonna bang them up. So really, really understanding them at the spur of the moment, right, as well as having that whole history laid out through forms and questionnaires. How do we? The big thing here is how do we make that engaging enough, enticing enough, and one of the broad solutions is the way that we communicate and convey the language in and around assessing as an initial and ongoing. And I think that's very important for the listeners, is that don't be too serious with it. Like, kind of get into a rhythm with it, so that the client understands they're not at a doctor's surgery, right? They're not being assessed and judged and evaluated. What you said is the quality of life. Like, you're doing this to improve quality of movement, which will then improve the quality of life. So you've got these qualitative indicators as outcomes. And I think that is very important, I believe, that to the success, I think, of the notion of assessment. Of course, then we talk about guessing, right? And guessing is just, I think these days, it's just out of the question. Like, of course, if you're not assessing, then there is a level of guessing, but we're moving beyond that, and we're going, how do you actually make assessing an art form, right? How do you make it an art form as much as a technical undertaking? So
100%. Yeah.
I love it. Have you got any more thoughts or any other shares based on our discussion in and around that?
I think just having a look at, again, I guess it's more around communication again, but the way, I think just making sure that, as I said before, that the mobility movement kind of screenings are included with the fitness assessment. For instance, I had a client last week who did her fitness assessment and like her R week, and she smashed it. Like she got heavier lifts in her strength testing. She did really, really well, but her mobility screening, her mobility kind of measures had all gone backwards. They'd all decreased. So for her, she was super stoked with her strength progress. And obviously it's fantastic, but it's also a matter of saying, all right, you've done really well with this, but I think we need to dial up your mobility here, because if we don't, you're going to keep going backwards down on this stream, and that strength level is not going to maintain. Like, you know, if you have less optimal joint alignment, you're not going to be able to keep lifting these weights that you want to keep lifting. So we need to just turn the dials and tune a little bit the way that we're approaching a session. So I think, you know, a lot of coaches in the past, I think it's changing a little bit now. They wait till there's an injury, or they wait till there's pain before they intervene and try and make an improvement in this kind of stuff. But this is really preventative. Like, this is getting in before the injury or before the pain happens. And I think that's really, really important. Like, it's, you know, not only for your client's movement quality and quality of life, but also for your bottom line. Like, that's your client retention.
That's right.
Because you don't want to wait until someone's got a really sore knee and they're insistent on going and seeing a physio or an osteo or a chiro, whatever, because of their knee pain. And before you know it, they've cancelled a few sessions with you. They've, you know, and they're allocating their funds to allied health instead. Like, if you can get in and say, oh, well, their knee is actually, like, they're getting a bit more tightness through their hips, their knee's starting to cave in a little bit when they lunge and it never used to, you can catch that and you can help them improve it before they get to that point. And then you keep them as an ongoing client, and they also think you're pretty incredible, right? Like, you know, I had a lady this morning that foam rolled her for the first time ever, her glutes, and did a squat, and her knee didn't hurt for the first time in about 5 years. And it was like her brain just went.
And these are, and these are simple hacks, and well, what we perceive as being fairly simple, but for them it's magic, right? So
mind blowing, yeah. And she's been going to see physios for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, they give her stretches and they give her all these things to do, but it's like a constant, you have to go back to the physio over and over again. And in 10 minutes, we foam rolled her glutes and her calves, and her knee pain disappeared. So for her, she like skipped out the door to go buy a foam roller and can't wait to come in next week. You're like, how powerful is that in terms of client retention?
Big time. Yeah. And it's a great point, Kim. And so at the end of the day, what you're doing there is you're essentially, it's looking at assessment in a different way. Like you're as a prelude, right? So that's why we have the injury prevention system. We have the movement restoration coaches based on the injury prevention system. So the injury prevention is precisely that. If you flag something and you go, well, precisely like the point I made, if that person the client decided to run 10 kilometers, right? It's no point kind of getting them on the treadmill again and doing another 10 Ks or whatever it may be, right? It's then going, well, I need to do more soft tissue work. I need to manipulate their whole lower limb to ensure that, you know, we can perform the session, or you might have to adjust the session. And so what you're doing is you're saying you need to be the adaptive coach based on actually flagging that. So you almost become like a movement prophet. Like you go, well, I know something's going to happen here. If we keep going down this train, we're going to derail. And all of a sudden, as you say, you know, there's your client, there's the income. So it's really, it's a great point. And so that is part of the ongoing assessing is being really privy to those potential disasters from happening.
Yeah. And then also, I guess that it comes back to that, how you communicate that too, right? Because if you say, oh, that's your knee's moving really badly, you're going to get really bad knee pain if you don't fix that. That's like red flags everywhere for that person. Yeah. Then they start freaking out, and suddenly next week they're like, oh my God, my knee hurts. And it's all because of how you communicated, that you put that fear into them, right? So yeah, it is really, really important, and it's awesome to be able to predict things, but it's also important to be aware of how you communicate that to them. Because the last thing you would want is to send them out the door thinking, oh my gosh, I'm broken.
That's right. So you need to, the feedback needs to be positive, specific, and timely as well. And then out of that, as you say, we can then adjust things or put it in a way, especially with personality typing, right? So, if you've got the real dominant type, the competitive type, they don't really want to stop. They want to go hard and hard. But then the communication behind that is, well, if you keep going hard and hard, well, you won't be able to go harder because, you're going to just get injured or, something bad's going to happen. So it's really important sometimes for that type to paint the outcome. If all of a sudden they're kind of going down that one-way track of beating their body down class after class after class. And as you said, well, our solution is to provide you with a flexibility and mobility session to mitigate, the risk of any injury occurring. So I think balancing the programming is really important here, where you have your recovery sessions, you've got your movement preparation factored in, of course, with your full analysis through the 7 screens that we teach as well, right? So all of those things are very important initially, but on an ongoing perspective, it becomes truly the art. The technical knowledge is there, but the art of coaching, really, really knowing and predicting, but then providing that pathway in a way that is properly communicated to that client, which makes assessing part and parcel of programming. It's not separate, just like the art of coaching is not separate to programming. And so all of these, the net effect is this integrative or integration of these elements that aren't just what do we talk about, like compliance or forced on or judgmental, because that's what that can come across as. So I think a few things here is one of which being is kind of create a greener language, so to speak, like create a more euphemistic, like make it more appealing and attractive, like you've done with your 3 R's, and have a functional recovery session, something like that actually matches your culture, your flavor, but you're doing all of the things anyway that are appropriate for that client, that group, to optimize their movement and to mitigate injury. So I think there's out of this session, out of this conversation, it's been very philosophical, but honestly, there are so many golden nuggets here for all coaches to be aware of, right? Awareness. And I think above all, arguably what I'd say is we're creating awareness through the systems we teach, not just for the coach, but for the client, to become more aware, to become more intelligent, more in tune with their body, so that they know when they go and pick up something or they're loaded in the wrong way, they go, oh, stop, no, I'm going to get injured. So what we're doing is, as part of that, where we're teaching and ingraining and empowering them to actually self-organize, to actually to understand how to self-regulate, in a sense, aren't we, when it comes to assessing?
Yeah, for sure. And I think with ongoing assessments too, you know how you'll have a client and you'll tell them 100 times, like, make sure you do your foam rolling or make sure you do whatever, and they just don't do it. Like, oh, I got busy, I couldn't do it, whatever excuse they come up with. But then I think sometimes when you have the numbers or the results in front of you and you can say, okay, well, what have you done differently in the last 10 weeks? If they've changed, they've regressed in terms of their mobility. If someone's like, oh, I've actually have stopped going for my walks at lunchtime and I've been sitting down at my desk for a lot longer hours, the numbers in front of them might be what they need to be like, oh, like a lot of people, they don't take something on board until they've essentially discovered it for themselves. So you can tell them so many times, foam roll your glutes, and they're like, oh yeah, I'll do it. But then if they see those numbers and they go, oh, that's actually really bad, like they see the difference. I think it can be really powerful for them as well to be like, oh, that stuff that they're telling me to do actually is important. Like maybe I should listen when they talk, which we've all had clients like that, right? That you're just sitting there like, how many times have I told you to do this? And until they see it and discover what happens when they don't for themselves, they don't comply.
Yeah, it's a good point. We can't, I suppose, as coaches, assume that they're going to do it based on them nodding and agreeing. It's actually doing it with them, right? Not for them, but with them, so that their awareness of the beneficial effects is experienced, it's felt, So that becomes an embodied experience, right? And and then they know the benefits. They feel it. They know it. They feel it. And so that becomes, as you said, for coaches to not be shy and assume that you're giving your clients some homework to do and they're going to do it, right? It's a lost cause. So lots of lessons there, huh? For lots of little insights and lessons. So folks, Kim's a constant contributor. If you haven't seen or heard or much about the Movement Restoration Coach, please reach out to myself or Kim. We'll tell you more about it. And of course, if you've got any other coaches or friends who you think that would benefit from our programs, please talk to them more about that. But most of all, have a bit of a reflection on what you're doing in your own practice from an assessment perspective. What's your view on it? What's your philosophy on it? Are you assessing, or are you just guessing, or maybe neither of those things? Are you appreciating it enough to actually now maybe have a paradigm shift around, your notion of assessing? So based on the previous post that Kim's put up, our programs, we'll continue to talk, won't we, about it? We'll continue to deliver practical videos, write articles, and do many more of these Q&As around different topics. So Kim, thank you very much for jamming with me on this really relevant topic, and really transcending our understanding, I think, of assessing and knowing the importance of it as an ongoing notion, and as a notion that is also artful as much as it is technical. So it's been awesome. I've been energized. Thank you for your insights. And listeners, please, we're going to post this into the group. So if you have any questions in particular that feed off from this for myself and Kim, add those in as well. And we'll be happy to try to answer and obviously continue this conversation in another way, shape or form in the near future.
Yeah, for sure. Like, comment on the post as well and tell us what you're currently doing. Or if you have any questions about the way that I do things at my gym, I'm more than happy to share our templates, all that kind of stuff with you guys to help you wrap your head around it if you need a little bit of a guide to follow as well. Cool.
All right, that's our kind of first Q&A kind of thing. It's not the first time we talked about this topic, but I've enjoyed it. I think in this fashion, it's good to bounce back and forward, and hopefully the listeners have seen and heard some relevance in and around it. So until next time, we'll be seeing you. Thanks, guys.
See you later.